Hello, my name is Danny Singer. I am the Chief Executive and founder here at Noetica, a company specializing in advanced contact center software. And in this short presentation, I would like to introduce you to a concept called live person detection, or LPD for short, which provides a sort of intermeshing of artificial intelligence and live human interaction within the context of a contact center operation. I'll start by looking at the general problem with outbound calling and the negative image that outbound calling has in the industry. First of all, contact centers make outbound calls for a variety of reasons, and most of them are absolutely justified, useful, not only for the people making the calls, but also for the recipients of those calls. This could be things like appointment setting, could be renewals of various subscriptions, it could be debt collection, it could be reminders of various kinds, proactive customer service, and various other things of this type, which are absolutely useful. However, a small percentage of these calls are telemarketing calls or other types of cold calls. We all heard about PPI, we all heard about ambulance chasers and various other things of this type. However, it's worth keeping in mind that only less than 10% of all outbound calls made using dialers are actually cold calls. So basically calls to people you don't actually have a relationship with. This is still okay and valid under GDPR because voice is the only channel that still only requires an opt-out rather than an opt-in. So in many ways, it could very well be that outbound will actually increase in volume in future years. But what happened is that some cold callers have historically abused outbound dialers, abused it in a way that basically gave the whole industry a bad name. As a result, regulators, people like Ofcom, ICO, and so on, have basically decided to effect collective punishment on the whole industry. And they did so by banning some technologies that, although may have been seen as useful, are now effectively no longer okay to use. So what is, or more precisely what was, AMD? AMD is short for a technology called answer machine detection. And its purpose is to filter out calls to any type of answering machines. It's based on an algorithm called the cadence method, which basically analyzes the sound coming down the line when a call is connected. And it does that for the first 2 or maybe 3 seconds before classifying it as an answering machine or not. During this analysis period, 2 or 3 seconds, it stays completely quiet on the call center side, which is in itself a problem. However, the bigger problem is that it can misidentify things. Its accuracy is anywhere between 50 to 60%, which is no better than tossing a coin, to some claims go to 90 to 95%, depending on conditions. Now, what the outcome of that is that in some cases, the system will identify a call as a call to an answering machine, where in fact it is a real person. As a result, it will generate a silent call. A silent call is basically a call when you pick up and there's basically nobody at the other end. The problem is not that it generates a significant number of silent calls. The problem is that that amount of silent call is unmeasurable. So basically you can't tell how many silent calls you're generating. In a way, it's a little bit like, if a tree falls down in the forest, does it make a sound? It's exactly that kind of problem. So therefore, in March 2017, after much debate, Ofcom declared war on silent call. And therefore, it sounded the death knell for AMD as such, as a technology as well. So therefore, AMD is now effectively illegal in the UK. Most responsible call centers operators have now discontinued the use of AMD, and this had a considerable impact on the cost of outbound calling. Depending on the time of day that you actually make the call, 40 to 70% of calls made are to answering machines of some kind or another. The absence of AMD is thought to add 25 to 35% to the cost of outbound calling. This could come to a staggering £850,000 per year for a 100-agent operation. It also has a very bad negative impact on agent morale. Can you imagine if you're sitting there all afternoon trying to talk to people and you have to classify answering machine after answering machine after answering machine, voicemail, and so on. Eventually, when you do get a live call, it's a bit of a shock to the system. So, what is LPD? Primarily, it is a safe and accurate method for presenting agents with live customer calls only. So it basically does what AMD was supposed to be doing, but it does it better. And the reason it does it better is because it leverages artificial intelligence to eradicate all the shortcomings that AMD came with. Basically, its inaccuracy and a couple of more that I'll describe in a minute. The technology has been under patent protection globally since 2014 when we first tried it. As recently as a couple of weeks ago, we have received a full US patent as well. So how does it work? This is a very simplified explanation. It's actually a lot more complex than this, but it should give you a pretty good idea of what it does. So the first thing that happens is that all agents will pre-record a number of short phrases in their own individual voice, only for such campaigns they are associated with, and such campaigns that require LPD. These phrases will be something very short, like, hello, my name is Bob, and I'm calling on behalf of Acme Limited. Then, as the dialer dials, whenever it gets a connected call, which it doesn't at that point know whether it was answered by an answering machine or by a real person, instead of transferring that call to an agent like a normal predictive dialer would do, it simply earmarks an agent. It marks an agent for that particular call, and it doesn't yet deliver the call to the agent. The next thing that happens is that the recordings that that agent has recorded in their own voice is used to manage a very simple conversation between a robot that talks in the agent's own voice and the customer. At the same time, the LPD algorithm will track the conversation and try and understand from certain elements such as talk over and detecting beeps and measuring silences and a variety of other things that are used behind the scenes, will try and detect whether the person or the entity that responded at the other end is actually a real person or an answering machine. Once that detection has been performed, if it is a real person, then the agent whose recordings have been used will then get that call. So the transition is very smooth between the robot that talks in the same voice as the agent and the agent herself. And any calls that are identified as answering machines are then discarded. So first of all, let's have a look and see how this invention affects customer experience itself. First and foremost, the most important benefit that LPD delivers is the elimination of silent calls. Silent calls are a major problem for the industry because they cause completely unnecessary distress to the most vulnerable in society. We're talking about older people, we're talking about people who live on their own, isolated people, and people who actually will feel that receiving calls when nobody talks to you could be emotionally stressful. It's also stressful for most other people, but possibly more stressful to people that are in this kind of groups. Now, the other problem with silent calls is that you are actually alienating the very people that you want to talk to. So you can imagine if you actually make 2 silent calls to somebody and then you actually manage to talk to them, they will immediately make the link between the call that they received and the silent calls that they've received previously. Therefore, they'll be far less minded to actually talk to you or far less sympathetic to your proposition, whatever that is, than if you didn't deliver silent calls. And what that means is that a lot of people try to opt out from receiving any kind of calls from unknown entities, using all these new products on the market that shield them from all this kind of activity. And they are actually at risk of missing useful calls, reminders of doctor's appointments or product deliveries and so on and so forth, which they will not get simply because they opted out of the ability to receive calls. There is a second problem with AMD. How many times did you receive a call, you picked the phone up, you said a couple of hellos and got nothing from the other side until eventually you get the noisy background of call center and somebody starts talking to you? What happens with this is that a lot of people are now wise to this, and they will simply hang up when they hear that nobody talking to them as they pick up the phone. So they would know it's a call center calling them. They would know that they probably have very little interest in talking to you if you are trying to do this, detect them in this way. The Ofcom regulations that you can see here actually state that you need to deliver a call to an agent. Somebody needs to, from the contact center, needs to talk to the recipient of a call within less than 2 seconds if you are not using detection. If you are using detection, this could actually be a bit longer because the time is measured from the moment that the other person begins to speak. So from your hello. So what could happen is that if you don't say hello immediately, the detection period could be a lot longer. So in many ways, if you stay silent, the call center will stay silent for quite a long time. So therefore, in some cases, this pause can be longer than 2 seconds. And here's the big problem. The problem is that this pause exists on every call made when AMD is in use. It's not just some calls, it's every call. And therefore, it will alienate everybody you're calling, not just some people. To summarize, LPD eradicates not only all silent calls, but also it eliminates the 2+ seconds of initial silence associated with every AMD call. What does this mean? It means that answering machines of all types can now be safely and accurately detected without causing a nuisance to the public. In many ways, we feel that this is AI at its best, assisting but not replacing humans. On the next slide, you will hear a couple of examples of calls, real life calls, recorded using LPD.
Hello?
My name's Jess and I'm calling on behalf of the People's Postcode Lottery. How are you today?
Yeah, fine.
Brilliant. Have you heard of us before?
Yeah.
Right, great. What's your opinion so far?
Well, I wouldn't know, 'cause I don't do it.
Have you ever thought about doing it?
No, not really.
Is it just the advert you've seen and that's about it?
Hello.
My name's Shauna. I'm calling on behalf of the People's Postcode Lottery. How are you today?
I'm okay, thank you.
That's good to hear. It's just a quick call today. We're doing a big follow-up on the back of the adverts that have been running on TV.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of those at all?
I've seen one, yeah. I noticed one, yeah.
There is more to LPD than just detecting answering machines. And here are two other benefits that basically fall out of it. The first one is freshness of introductions. So basically, since the introduction is recorded in the best frame of mind, hopefully at the beginning of a campaign, when everybody is quite excited about starting this campaign, the introduction will be fresh and it will be engaging. So it's important that this makes a huge difference to the the entire frame of mind in which the call, on which the footing on which the call starts. The other thing is that it is completely personal. So although the introductions and the initial conversation is robotic, it is still delivered in the tone and in the voice of the same agent that you would end up talking to, which means that in most cases, people that receive those calls will be absolutely unaware that the first few seconds of the call, they were actually talking to an AI agent and not actually the same person they ended up talking to. So what is the operational value add of this invention? First of all, increased productivity. The main measure that we use for this is SPH, what we call success per hour, and is defined as the average number of successful call outcomes per agent hour worked. This applies to all types of outbound activities. So, for example, in insurance is the number of successful quotes or renewals or new policies that have been sold. In collections, it could be payments collected or promises to pay made or payment plans agreed. In utilities, it could be smart meter engineer appointments being made, and so on and so forth. Each one of those calls that end up in a positive outcome, we classify as a successful call. Now, based on 4 years of live use of this technology in various call centers, we have realized that LPD delivers on average a 40% uplift in SPH. Now, this is very significant. What does it mean, a 40% SPH boost? What it means is that 40% more revenue with no added staffing costs. This, or alternatively, the same revenue with 29% fewer staff. This is clearly driving profit and is driving it very fast. Also, it has a side effect which is as important, and that is increased agent morale. Now, as you can imagine, it's not an easy job working in an outbound call center or working for an outbound campaign. It is sometimes heartbreaking, it is sometimes dispiriting, it can be a thankless job. So what this does, it removes or filters out from agents most of the very fast, abrupt, and sometimes abusive rejections. The reason for that is that most of these rejections are actually completed during the artificial intelligence part of the process, during the automated part of the process. So if somebody stays on the line to the point where they actually get to speak to the live agent, they're less likely to be abusive or to actually be abruptly put the phone down. Now, what this means is not only that agents waste less time on this kind of non-productive calls, it actually makes their work a lot more satisfying and less frustrating in a lot of cases. The second effect of this is that it reduces the repetitions. As I said before, the introductions are fresh. They don't have to say it several hundred times a day, and therefore they've got a shorter productive average handling time, which is a major matrix in contact centers, and you get more motivated agents, and you get the effect of fresh introductions each time. So looking at agents' experience, we've done a survey a few years back for agents that have been using this product, this technology, for a period of time. And as you can see here, we actually classified it in several ways. The bad ones are the red ones. We didn't get any red responses. No change is the orange one or yellow one, and the green ones are agree or strongly agree. And the questions we put to them were, does it make a difference to your working day, a positive difference? And more than 50% said yes. Does improve the public perception of call centers? And the same amount said yes. And also the most important thing here, which got the best outcome of all, is that the opportunity to increase revenue for agents. So basically, because they are much more efficient, if they are rewarded by performance, then therefore they can get increased bonuses and commissions. Generally, what we can see here is that the agent experience is extremely positive. And also, we were fearing at the beginning of deploying this technology that it might be actually quite difficult to transfer agents from one to the other. It turns out that agents took to it like ducks to water. It was actually very easy. Within 10 minutes, they were actually very conversant with it. On this slide, we are looking at the comparison between a campaign running with LPD and a campaign running without LPD. At the top, these three graphs are the LPD campaign, and similar measures at the bottom for the non-LPD campaign. So what we're actually observing by looking at this is that, first of all, the opportunities to sell are almost doubled. This is quite significant. That means that agents have much more of an opportunity to talk to people that are more likely to buy, have a higher propensity of actually either buying or renewing or whatever it is that contact center is doing. What this leads to is that, as I mentioned earlier, the success per hour is consistently up by 40%. So this is really the big benefit that comes out of this technology, and without any of the harm that previous technologies did. Furthermore, we can see that agent connects per hour are dramatically lower. This is slightly counterintuitive. So agents get fewer calls. Yes, they do, because they don't get any of the sort of answering machines, voicemails, and so on. They don't get the abusive calls, the disconnects. However, the calls that they do get are of much better quality, and therefore better conversion. And what we see here is the conversion percentages are dramatically higher. Now, we basically attribute this to higher morale and the fact that agents are a lot happier in their work, and therefore they can concentrate much more on doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. So what does this mean to us as a company? Well, from the start, the intention was to deliver AI in new ways in order to provide responsible outbound dialing within our wider initiative, which we call Smartbound. What is Smartbound? Well, Smartbound is about taking responsibility seriously. And this comes from the fact that a lot of dialer vendors, manufacturers of this kind of products, have always had a rather cavalier approach to the harm that the technology can cause. In this way, they're not very different from, say, pharmaceuticals that produce drugs. And they say, well, we produce the drugs, it's not our responsibility. Who eventually ends up misusing them? It's the doctor's responsibility to make sure that they don't fall into the wrong hands. Or arms manufacturers that will produce arms, and they say, well, look, it's not our responsibility, or who actually gets hurt by these arms. Well, we want to take this a little bit further, and we want to actually, as vendors and manufacturers of these technologies, we want to change that attitude a little bit. So what we've done, we've taken several technologies and put them under an umbrella called Smartbound. And what this is aiming to do is restore the reputation, some of the damaged reputation of outbound calling in general. So what else is included under our Smartbound initiative? Well, here's one example. Another type of really annoying call is what Ofcom calls an abandoned call. And abandoned calls are not as creepy as silent calls, because there is actually a message being played, but they result from sort of over-enthusiastic predictive dialers. All predictive dialers generate abandoned calls, and they basically are the result of the probabilistic algorithm that is behind predictive dialers, which means that occasionally they will connect more calls than they've got agents available to handle those calls. Therefore, the difference between the two has to be abandoned. Ofcom takes a more forgiving view of abandoned calls. However, since last March, they've removed any acceptable limit, legal limit of abandoned calls. Therefore, it's unclear how many of those dialers are allowed to do. Therefore, we created a new technology called Snowdrop. Comes from no drop calls, and what that does, it generates precisely 0% of abandoned calls when you use a predictive dialer. It's unique. It's something that no other dialer can do, and therefore we feel that it's very much befits it to be under the Smartbound initiative, trying to protect the public not only from silent calls, but also from abandoned calls. So we are aiming to be the responsible alternative. Through inventions like LPD and Snowdrop, we're trying to become the natural home for responsible, considerate, forward-thinking outbound operators. And by leveraging artificial intelligence selectively and in harmony with human activity, we are trying to build a strategy that makes us the sort of progressive end of the contact center technology market. Outbound is here to stay. As I mentioned, GDPR is only going to increase the amount of outbound activity. However, cold calling is going to be a smaller and smaller part of this. Proactive customer contact is really the name of the game. So we believe that the outbound industry deserves better. Thank you very much.